Shri Guru Charana Saroja Raja Nijamana Mukuru Sudhari Parana Raghubara Bimala Jasu Jodayak Phalachari Buddhahina. Hi everyone, welcome, namaste. So happy to be with you today. We're going to spend a little time with Hanuman and his extended family as we talk a little bit about the Leelas of these great beings that are the main characters of the Ramayana or the Ramcharitmanas, which is a sacred text that is often referred to in India and elsewhere. Right now I'm talking to you from Brooklyn, New York. And since we can't go on pilgrimage to India ourselves, let's just take a little virtual journey. I thought I'd share some images with you and we can talk a little bit about Hanuman. And at the end of the video will be a musical video recording of the chanting of the Hanuman Chalisa. And you can join along. So I'm just going to share my screen here with some images for you. So I've entitled this program, Hanuman, Holder of Ram Rasayana. So rasa, as you probably know, is juice or essence. And it's often used as a term in Ayurveda, for example, for a healing remedy. But it's also the juice of devotion, of connection to our divine being that's out, feels like it's outside of us, but is inside of us and connects all of us together. So in this case, as you can see, the subtitle is Hanuman holds the elixir. So the Rasayana in this case is elixir. And the elixir is what? The name of Ram. That they say is no different than Ram himself or herself. Ram is that great presence that it transcends all differentiations, that is the love that lives inside of us, that connects all of us to all beings everywhere. And it is that place, it's that well that we can access, that we can dip into, that takes us to the core of our being if we repeat the name. They say the chanting of the divine name is the practice of this day and age that will help us to get through our lives in a good way and to meet all the challenges and the good things that come to us in the best way that we can. So this is an image of Kanchi Hanuman with Drona Giri. Some of you might be new to this being named Hanuman, and some of you might have heard Hanuman, have been chanting the Hanuman Chalisa for a long time. But Hanuman is a great being from the Ramayana or the Ramcharitmanas, as I mentioned before. He is a Vanara, so he looks like a being from the forest, in this case like a monkey. But he is a divine being that embodies all the qualities that we have and we have to remind ourselves about. And that is our own innate wisdom, our ability for discernment, the courage that we need to get through our lives in a wide, open-hearted way, as does Hanuman, and to be fully in service of the divine. In the Ramayana, the divine is represented as Sri Ram. He is a being that looks like a prince in this particular Leela, or this divine story. And he is also in service of Ram's feminine aspect, who in this story is Sita. She's no different from Ram, two sides of the same coin. But through a series of events that occur in this story, Ram has to help bring them together again as they get separated by the great demon known as Ravan. So this image is of Hanuman from my guru's temple in Kanchi, which is in the foothills of the Himalayas in India. And in this particular depiction, you can see him with one leg up in the air as he's flying over the earth and the waters, carrying in his hand a mountain named Dronagiri, which has the healing herb which will eventually save the life of Lakshman, who is Sri Ram's brother, in the great battle that ensues toward the end of the Ramayana in Lanka, when Ram is defeating Ram and his army of monkeys, Vanaras, including Hanuman, led by the chief of the monkeys, and in order to bring Sita back to Ram, as she has been kidnapped by Ravan. So this is the mountain of the healing herbs. And what you see right here in his other arm is a mace, or the gada. The gada is one that when you are struck with this, it's like a thunderbolt of inner wisdom that strikes at your heart. That's another way of looking at it. So maybe we wish to be struck by this gada. So this next image here is a beautiful scene from the top of a hilltop called Anjanadri. This is in Karnataka, in the south of India, in a place called Hampi. Hampi now is considered a World Heritage Site, but in the mystical realm, it is actually considered the birthplace of Hanuman, also known as Kishkinda in the Ramayana. And at the very top of this hill is this little temple that you see up here, which is actually a temple to Anjaneya, which is Hanuman as the son of Anjani or Anjana, both names for his mother, who is also a Vanara, who is divine, in a divine way, is able to bring forth Hanuman into this world. Hanuman is brought in by the great divine beings, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, at a time when they feel that the world is in imbalance, or is out of balance. And the negative forces that are manifested in the form of the 10-headed demon Ravan need to be met with. And so Vishnu takes the form of Sri Ram. Shiva says that he must help Ram. And so he manifests many of his aspects in the form of Hanuman. And the feminine aspect, as I mentioned before, who is Shri in the big form, she now appears as Sita, King Janaka's daughter, and is born from the earth. And very early in the story of the Ramayana, when Ram and Sita meet each other and they are in union, they are immediately separated. And it takes Hanuman, the flow of grace, the breath of Ram, to unite Ram and Sita once again, to unite the great soul, the Paramatman, with the Atman, which is who we are. We are all individual souls. We don't fully recognize we're all part of the same great one soul. And so, through this Leela, we are able to swim in those waters that bring us into the one ocean. These are the 575 steps that I think it takes to get up to the hilltop. And it is considered a pilgrimage. And each time we do practice, it's actually a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage to the Hridaya, to the cave in our hearts, our spiritual heart, where we have access at all times to that place where we can feel at ease and at one. Some of these images, this is baby Hanuman with Anjani. In the story of Hanuman and the Ramayana, when Hanuman is born, he's actually born with these superpowers, but he isn't born with the wisdom of how to use them. And through a series of events where he sees the sun in the sky and thinks of it as a sweet fruit, and jumps up to swallow it, Indra, the lord of the skies and the elements, is angry with Hanuman and he strikes him down. And also he's also cursed by some of the rishis because he's disrupting their practice, to forget his superpowers until he's reminded. And towards the end of the Ramayana, when he actually has to jump over the mountain, over the ocean, from the south of India to Lanka, he is reminded of his superpowers by Jambavan. And that can be seen as a representation of what Jambavan says to Hanuman when we chant the Hanuman Chalisa. So, as we take our little journey through the streets of India, this is a little shot from Vrindavan. On the back of I think I'm just walking here. But if you've been to India, you know that, the sacred beings, the divine beings are seen everywhere. Whether it's the name of a storefront, Sri Ram Travels or Durga Insurance Company. Right here, here's our reminder. There is Hanuman opening his heart in which Ram and Sita live. You can visit ruins. This is a fort in a wildlife tiger sanctuary, actually, called Bandhavgarh. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back here. This is Hanuman in Bandhavgarh. And it's a fort that is within a tiger reserve. And in the ruins of the fort are many depictions of actually Vishnu in his many avatars, as a tortoise, as a boar, as Narsimha, and he goes through many incarnations. But also within this fort in the temple is this image of Hanuman. Here he is again. Bandhavgarh, they say, is a place where Ram and Lakshman were when they were separated from Sita. Bandho, in this case, is brotherhood. So Bandhavgarh is this fort. Everywhere you go in India is a reminder of these divine beings. Here's another image from Hampi, which I showed you earlier on, which I said was Kishkinda, the birthplace of Hanuman. This is an image of Hanuman where you can see offerings have been made of tulsi leaves. And Hanuman is covered in what they call the tilak, which is often you see on the forehead of devotees. This is the tilak of Ram. And that's how Hanuman is shown here in this ancient ruins, which look kind of like this. It's a beautiful place in the central part of India. And these ruins are now in stone. But if you know the stories, you can kind of enter into the story of Ram and Hanuman as you walk through this site. Here's another image of Hanuman. In this case, offerings have been made to Hanuman here, as you can see below. And you can also see the tilak. In this case, it's the markings of Shiva, which is the 3 lines across the forehead. If you were traveling through India, you might see the wandering mendicants, the sadhus, who will show the lineage that they belong to, depending on the markings that they might have on their forehead, sometimes all over their bodies. So this is a descent into one of the water tanks, but I thought it was a really great way to talk about and introduce the idea of the Ramcharitmanas. So Manas is the lake of the mind, and Charit is the story, and Ram is Ram. So Ramcharitmanas is actually the descent into the lake of the stories of Sri Ram. And each chapter, as we read the Ramcharitmanas, is a descent into that lake of our own hearts. Meet Hanuman. This is an image of Hanuman from the Taos temple in New Mexico. It's also Neem Karoli Baba's ashram here in the West. And I bring up this image to talk about another way in which we do our practices, which is Manas Puja, where we bring to mind the visual of what these great beings might look like. The practices of India are so beautiful in this way, and not just in India, in so many cultures and traditions from around the world. We visualize the great beings and we describe them to help us enter into their presence. So in this case, like in the Hanuman Chalisa, we talk about the gold earrings that Hanuman wore, and his curly locks, and his body that shines like a mountain of gold. These are the images that come to mind. And here we see Hanuman's beautiful face, where we see his eyes are half closed, where he's half inward and also ready to do action in the world, equipoised. So that's just a little clip from January 1st. Every year for many years now we chant 108 repetitions of the Hanuman Chalisa. It's something that we do to set the tone, set our intention for the rest of the year. We have to keep reminding ourselves that we're so easily pulled away by our thoughts and emotions and everything that's going on in the world outside of us, that in order to find that place inside of us that we know is there on some level, but we don't remember. Practices help us do that. Whatever our practices might be, it might be pranayam, where we're connecting with our breath, aligning all the channels in our body to the divine. It might be reading these sacred texts. It might be chanting the name of the divine. It might be doing asana, where we're aligning our whole bodies with physical practices to bring us to that place where we can sit in our own hearts. This is an image of a tiny Hanuman, actually, from the little farm that is at the base of our temple in Kenchi. We often like to go and sit there. It's very peaceful. And here you see Hanuman you see Ram inscribed on his heart here. And he's covered, you often see Hanuman like this in a reddish orange. He's covered in sindoor. Sindoor is the red vermilion color that women in India traditionally would apply to their foreheads or to their heads as a sign of devotion to their male counterpart, their husband in this case. And in the story of the Ramayana, Hanuman sees Sita one day applying this sindoor to her head, and he's like, "What is that?" And she says, "This shows my devotion to Sri Ram." And so he goes out and gets a whole bunch of sindoor and covers his whole self so that he can show his devotion to Ram. These are leelas. These are ways in which we can transcend our thoughts about things and really connect with our heart. Here is an image of Kale Hanuman. Kale because he's black. Kala means black. And this is taken in a temple in Jaipur, in Rajasthan, in India. Every morning before people go to work, and all day, maybe when you're taking a walk or you're on a lunch break, you can pop into a temple, have darshan. This is what everybody is doing here, where you connect with the divine by being in their presence in these consecrated sanctums or sanctuaries. So here is not just a statue, but a divine being in stone. In this case, it's granite. So this is an image of Hanuman doing his sadhana to Sri Ram. But I also like to think of this, I've titled this slide Charanamrit. Charanamrit is usually the nectar from the washing of the feet of the divine, which is what Hanuman is doing here. But chanting the name of the divine is in the same way receiving the Charanamrit. That's what the name is. That is the elixir. That's the rasa. The essence is in the name. Here's an image of what's called Ram Parivar. And it's a very interesting way of talking about divinity. You'll see this image often. Parivar means family. And you'll see here Hanuman is bowing. And always, and this is his pose of being in service of Sri Ram and Sita. And you can see Lakshman here. And you can see Ram's other brothers, Shatrughna, as well as Bharata. Bharata's here. This is Shatrughna bowing. And essentially what you're seeing here are all the forces that are required in order for us to align with our own being, which is in alignment with the universe. So oftentimes you will hear of Ram being referred to as prana, which is life force. Hanuman is referred to as life force, And Ram here is the supreme being, and as I mentioned before, Sita is the individual soul that is part of the one, the Paramatman. Lakshman here is considered as one-pointed focus. Bharata is pure devotion in full service of Ram. And Shatrughna is the other brother who supports that. Here are more images of Hanuman in full service. In this case, this is the mudra of blessing, of abundance, and saying everything's okay. And here is pranam, Anjali mudra. But notice he's bowing. We want to be in that place. We're on our knees in surrender. Here's another image. This is actually one of my favorite images of Hanuman, where while he is always in motion on one level, being in service and fulfilling the tasks and duties of as Sri Ram's emissary, he is also fully in meditation on Sita Rama, as I've said in this case, both sides of the same coin. And you can see Sita Ram here. You see Ram in his heart. You see Ram, Lakshman, and Sita in the temple. Whatever ways in which we can visualize. Here's another image. Now this is the full body image of Hanuman from the Taos temple. And here he's flying over the ocean. And in this case, he still has his gada. But if you look at his hand, I'm not sure if I can zoom in here, he's actually holding a ring. And on the ring is inscribed Ram's name. What's happening here, as in the story of the Ramayana, I mentioned before that Sita is actually abducted by Ravan. And in the Leela, Ram is not able to find Sita. And this is the paradox of the story of Ram, where though he is the divine being, the one supreme soul who knows everything, he doesn't know where Sita is. So we flip-flop between Sri Ram and Ramchandra, who's the king. as a way in which to see our pathways, but we're not always fully knowing what's happening. But we can get there if we bow down to Hanuman. So in this case, Hanuman is jumping over the ocean, and he's got the ring, which is what Ram gives Hanuman to show to Sita when he arrives, so that Sita has full confidence that Hanuman is coming on behalf of Ram. Because as I mentioned earlier, Sita is actually abducted by Ravan very early in the story, so she doesn't meet Hanuman until that moment when Hanuman finds her in the Ashokavan, which is where Ravana has kept Sita captive. So this is one of the forms of Hanuman here, dressed in orange at this time. There's another beautiful image of Hanuman where, while he's in active duty, still his heart and his mind is always resting in the name of Ram, Ram Nam. So you see him sitting here, he's doing his practice. This is the book, which has been offered marigolds, flowers, because in India, even the sacred texts are considered divinity itself. The name of Ram is what is on the tip of Saraswati's tongue, all of our tongue. That is Saraswati. That is wisdom in the form of the word or the name. Here is a beautiful ancient doorway in the town of Vrindavan. It's a sacred town. Many people consider it to be existing in a different loka, in a different dimension. But this occurred to me when I saw this. It's a doorway. And in the Hanuman Chalisa, one of the verses is Rama duare tumara khavari hota nagya binupe sare. So in this case, in this particular verse, Hanuman is referred to as the doorkeeper to Ram. So if we approach Hanuman, we can enter into the doorway of Ram. It's another beautiful image of Ram hugging Hanuman, embracing Hanuman. As soon as Ram meets Hanuman, he recognizes that they are actually spiritual brothers. And then also later on in the text, Sita refers to Hanuman as her son. And that's another whole story. But this is the love. This is the love between Hanuman and Ram. In the story, at some point, Ram asks Hanuman, "Who am I to you?" And Hanuman says, "As the body, I see myself devoted to you. As the individual soul, I see myself as a part of you. When I know who I am, I see us as one." Here's another beautiful expanded image here of Hanuman singing the names. He's chanting. His eyes are half closed, filled with tears. And he's got the manjiras in his hand. And he's chanting the name of Ram. Jai Shri Ram. That's what it says here in this book. And there's Ram and Sita. There's another excellent image of him actually here as a wandering monk. They say that Hanuman is eternal. He's Chiranjeevi. He's never left. And while the form of Ram and the form of Sita might have left us, we can bring them back by chanting their name. The name is eternal. Hanuman is eternal. And here we see him. This is Ram's bow and his sandals, always at the feet of Ram. This is another beautiful image of Hanuman, where he's actually made up of the name of Ram. There's a beautiful story in the Ramayana as well, where after Sita has been reunited with Ram, she wants to give Hanuman a gift. So she gives him a necklace of her pearls. And Hanuman takes the necklace and starts biting each one of the pearls and spitting them out. And they say, Hanuman, what are you doing? And he says, well, I don't see Ram. And she said, well, is Ram in everything? And he says, yes, it is. And when he opens up himself, she can look inside and she sees that every fiber of Hanuman's being is Ram. So that's what this image is showing us. This is a beautiful image that my friend Cindy or Shanti made of Hanuman as well. She painted this. So this is Veer Hanuman. This is an image actually from the National Gallery of New Delhi. It's a tantric image of Hanuman that shows him in his warrior mode. Because the other thing that Hanuman is courageous. He is the embodiment of courage. He has no fear. Why? Because he knows he's fully in service of Ram. And because he's connected with that place, every action is going to be in fulfillment of Ram's desires, which are our own desires. Here's an image of Sita Ram. I like to see them together because these are our feminine and our masculine aspects in full union. This is something that we don't see often, even though Ravana is talked about a lot in the Ramayana. We don't actually see many images of him, but here he is carved on one of the pillars of Hampi, where, as we've talked about below, here are his 10 heads and his many arms. These are the demons that we're battling every day. Here's another beautiful image of Hanuman, where he's approaching Sita in the Ashokavan. And he actually, I'm not sure whether he's giving Sita the ring or after, I think this might be after he has spoken to Sita, she takes a jewel from her hair and she gives it to Hanuman and she says, give this to Sri Ram to let him know that I have been and am fully always surrendered at his feet. And that's how I'm getting through this time. Come and get me. This is Darbar is a name that's often used in India for the mystical palace. This is an image of after Sita and Ram are united. You see them here in the palace of Ayodhya. Hanuman is at their feet in full service. Here's another image of Hanuman from Neem Karoli Baba's temple in Vrindavan. I actually took this recently, last year when I was in India in January. And I love that he's dressed in orange. One of the traditions in India is that part of the practice is actually the bathing of the deities and dressing them. Here is the same Hanuman from Vrindavan, another image though that I took many, many years ago. I think about 20 years ago when I was in Vrindavan. Down the street in Vrindavan was a beautiful saint. His name was Choti Maharaj. We used to go visit him. And this was his Hanuman, very simple Hanuman that he would do his puja to. This is also a lesser known image of Hanuman that I love so well. It was actually gifted to me and is painted by a devotee in the West. And I love this image because here is Hanuman talking to Vibhishan. And Vibhishan here is actually, in the story of the Ramcharitmanas, is the brother of Ravana, one of his brothers. He has another one, Kumbhakarna, and some others. But here Vibhishan is actually not a demon. but he is living with his brother Ravana, who's taken over Lanka. At the end of the Ramayana, when Ram defeats Ravana, he actually gives the kingdom of Lanka to Vibhishana. But before that happens, when Hanuman meets Vibhishana in Lanka when he's coming to look for Sita, he actually implores Vibhishana to come with him to see Sri Ram and to talk to him. And this is how counsel is received by Vibhishana through Hanuman. So this is that moment when Hanuman is talking to Vibhishana. I mentioned earlier about Hanuman bringing the life-giving Sanjivani herb to Lakshman, who is actually struck down on the battlefield in Lanka. This is another beautiful folk image of Hanuman flying over the ocean with the herb on the mountain of Dronagiri. This is an image from Hampi as well, from the temple carved into granite, where Hanuman is offering the elixir. And I like to look at this and see that that's what the name is. Here is a favorite place of mine and many others in Neem Karoli Baba's temple in Rishikesh. I never met Neem Karoli in the Baba, in the body, Neem Karoli Baba in the body, but I did visit this temple often. And this temple was built by Sri Siddhi Ma, who I consider my guru. And she says she made this temple for us to connect with Maharaji. And I'm going to show you an image in a second. But this is a tiny little cave underneath this very tall Hanuman. He might be about maybe 30 feet high. And it's a tiny little quiet place that I like to go and sit. And I just wanted to show you this image. To show you here again is an image of Ram Parivar, Ram's family. Here is the image of Hanuman in meditation. And here is an image of Sri Neem Karoli Baba when he was very young. And this is our place where we sit. And if we can almost bring that image to mind at any time in the day when we need to take refuge, I like to see this image and see myself in this place. Wrapped in this red cloth here is the Ramayana, which is also worshipped, also where we go and bow. Here's the Hanuman I'm referring to. That little cave is through this doorway under Hanuman's feet. This temple is actually on the road between Rishikesh and Haridwar. And in India, actually, the Indian army worships Hanuman because Hanuman is the chief of the monkey army. And so many times as you're sitting on the temple grounds, you'll hear the army trucks driving by, and the men on the truck will be saying, Bajrangbali Hanuman ki jai. So that is, Bajrangbali is the form of Hanuman as the thunderbolt. So he harnesses all the energy of thunder and lightning in his body. You can see him here as very strong, and at the same time, his weapon is down, and his mudra is the one of blessing. This is another image of Hanuman on the walls of the temple, of the Rishikesh temple. Mandir means temple. And here he's got his manjiras in his hand, and he's singing the name of Ram, as we very often did in that temple. Hopefully we'll get back there when we can travel again. These are more images from Hampi of all the different moods of Hanuman that we've talked about here. He's got his hand up again here in the blessing of the mudra of blessing. Here we see him in Anjali Mudra bowing down, again here, standing in service, here kneeling in service, here carrying the mountain with this life-giving herbs. Here as the chief of the monkey army, bowing again. It's everywhere. It's a reminder everywhere. This is Sri Siddhima. This is my guru. She left the body. It's now been a little over 2 years. But I spent 20 years visiting her off and on. And I still feel very connected to her. And the greatest gift I believe that she gave us was talking about how important practice is. Because it is with practice that we open those pathways, those channels in our hearts to that place that we call divine or sacred or the one spirit. And here she is standing at the door of the Rishikesh temple to Maharaji's. There's a beautiful sacred murti of Maharaji here, and she's standing at the door. And one of the things that we loved to do when we were in the temples, we would get up really early, before dawn, take a bath, and go and do our individual practices. And we would wait to see her walking the temple grounds, which she did early in the morning. And she would always say to us every time we were sitting there to do practice, "This is very good, keep up. Discipline is so important." With this discipline, we're able to access that rasa. I think this image that's taken here might be one of the last times that I saw her in the body. So I just want to close by saying a couple of things. One is that in the very beginning of the Ramcharitmanas that's written by Tulsidas, he says, before he even starts telling the story of Ram, he thanks all of us who gather together, everybody who's coming together to hear the stories of these divine beings. When we do that, we create a sangam. A sangam is a sacred confluence of the rivers. In India, for example, you might hear about the sangam in Allahabad, where the Kumbh Mela happens, where the Ganga and the Yamuna meet, and the invisible river, the Saraswati, joins them. It's the Prayag or the Sangam. That's what we do. Every time we come together to hear the stories of Ram, to see his images of Hanuman, of Sita, of all divine beings, whether it's Krishna, Radha, the Devi, the goddess, any of them. These are all pathways to the divine, those streams that go into the one ocean. And by repeating the name Ram, it might be the divine name, might be one of them. In this case, that's what we're talking about. We see Ram everywhere. In the hearts of all beings that we meet every day, in our own hearts. So I want to thank you for joining me today in this little virtual yatra, jumping all over the place, bringing us back to our own hearts. There's a T.S. Eliot quote that I don't remember well at all, but he talks about how we can explore all the places in the universe to bring us back to the place where we began. Thank you for joining me. Jai Siya Ram. So we're going to sing the Hanuman Chalisa. We'll first start with an invocation to Sri Ram. It's called the Sri Ram Vandana. It's an invocation to Sri Ram, at whose door is Hanuman. And with Hanuman's permission, we enter through the doorway. Rama Duare, Tumara Kavare. Hanuman is the keeper of the door. And then we'll sing some Sri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram.
Marutanandan Sakala Mangala Mula Nikandan Mangala Murati Marutanandan Sakala Mangala Mula Nikandan Shri Guru Charana Saroja Raja Nijamana Mukur Sudhari Barano Raghubara Bhimala Jasu Jodayaku Phalachari Buddhahina Tanu Janike Sumiro Pavana Kumara Bala Buddhi Vidya Dehu Mohi Hararu Kalesha Vikar Siyavara Ramachandra Pada Jai Sharanam Jaya Hanuman Jnana Guna Sagar Jaya Kapisha Tihu Loka Ujana Ramaduta Tulita Baladama Anjani Putra Pavana Sutana Mahavira Vikram Vajarangi Kumati Nivara Sumati Kesam Kanchana Varana Viraja Suvesa Kanana वज्र और ध्वजा विराजे, कांडे मुंज जनेऊ साज। शंकर सुवन केसरी नंदन, तेज प्रताप महाजगवंदन। विद्यावान गुणी अति चातुर, राम काज करिबे को आतुर। प्रभु चरित्र सुनिबे को रसिया, राम लखन सीता मन बसिया। सूक्ष्म रूप धरि सियाहि दिखावा, विकट रूप धरि लंक जरावा। भीम रूप धरि असुर संहारे, रामचंद्र जी के काज समारे। लाय सजीवन लखन जियाय, श्री रघुवीर हरषि उर लाए। रघुपति कीन्ही बहुत बड़ाई, तुम मम प्रिय भरतहि सम भाई। सहस बदन तुम रोजस गावे, अस कहि श्रीपति कंठ लगावे। सनकादिक ब्रह्मादि मुनीसा, नारद शारद सहित अहीसा। यम कुबेर दिगपाल जहाते, कवि कोविद कहि सके कहाते। तुम उपकार सुग्रीवन कीन्हा, राम मिलाय राजपद दीन्हा। तुमरो मंत्र विभीषण माना, लंकेश्वर भय सब जग जाना। युग सहस्र जो जन पर भानु, लील्योताहि मधुर फल जानु। प्रभु मुद्रिका मिले मुख माहि, जलधि लांघि गए अक्षर जनाहि। दुर्गम काज जगत के जेते, सुगम अनुग्रह तुम्हरे तेते। राम दुआरे तुम रखवारे, होत न आज्ञा बिन पैसारे। सब सुख लाए तुम्हारी शरण, तुम रक्षक काहू को डरना। आपन तेज समारो आपे, तीनों लोक हांकते कांपे। भूत पिशाच निकट नहीं आवे, महावीर जब नाम सुनावे। नासे रोग हरे सब पीरा, जपत निरंतर हनुमत वीरा। संकट से हनुमान छुड़ावे, मन क्रम वचन ध्यान जो लावे। सब पर राम तपस्वी राजा, दिन के काज सकल तुम साजा। और मनोरथ जो कोई लावे, सोए अमित जीवन फल पावे। चारों युग परताप तुम्हारा, हे प्रसिद्ध जगत उजियारे। साधु संत के तुम रखवारे, असुर निखंडन राम दुलारे। अष्ट सिद्धि नौ निधि के दाता, असवर दीन जानकी माता। राम रसायन तुम्हारे पास, सदा रहो रघुपति के दास। तुम्हारे भजन राम जी को पावे, जन्म जन्म के दुख बिसरावे। अंत काल रघुवरपुर जाए, जहाँ जन्म हरि भक्त कहाए। मङ्गलमूर्तिरूपा राम लखन सीता सहिता हृदय बसहु सुरभूप सियावर रामचंद्र पद जय शरणम। श्री राम जय जय राम।